In this video, we'll take a closer look at nested properties. And let's start with an easy one. And the first nested property that really looks interesting is this comments.status property. So what this is basically telling us is that comments are disabled. So let's see how we can quickly get to that property and check that comments are indeed disabled. As always, the first step is to parse the response body. And I'm going to use bm.response.json to do that. Now, once we've done that, navigating to this status property is a matter of understanding how the object is built and how to navigate to that specific properties. Now, you can do that visually by inspecting how the JSON object looks like, or in case you do not have a JSON object that you can inspect here, for example, you parsed it first from XML or from any other data structure, and you're not sure about how to actually get to a specific property, there's always console.log there to help you. And even in console.log, in case you're unsure about a property, in case you, for whatever reason, you do not see that information, I'll show you a trick on how to get the type of the property that you are actually asserting. Okay, so now let's start logging some things. And the first one is JSON data. And again, JSON data is an object. And then inside you'll see the prefs object, the comments object, and the status property. Now, let's just imagine that we have no idea what kind of object prefs is. So let's type here JSON data.prefs. We'll get only the prefs object. But in case you're unsure, you can just do typeof written together, and you will see here that the color has changed. And now when you're inspecting the object, you will see, and then when you're inspecting the console, you will see that this is an object. So you know that an object, in order to access properties of an object, you just have to use the dot to connect any nested properties that you have. So now we know that JSON data is an object, prefs is an object, comments is an object as well, and then inside comments we'll have a property called status, and we're gonna connect that with a dot as well. So let me clear the console now, and when we're submitting this, you will see here disabled. So now we have all the information that we need to start writing assertions. So let's write a test, and let's call it comments should be disabled. And inside the anonymous function, we are going to write a test. So let's define here a local property called comments. Or we can even call it comments status. And we're gonna put in inside exactly what we had in console.log. And now we can log the property instead of the entire path to that property. And we're going to use the property inside the test just to make the test a bit more easier to read. So we're expecting that comment status to equal disabled. So the test is passing. Let's just say it's enabled. And the test should fail. Assertion error, expecting disabled to equal enabled. So this is how you can assert a nested property. Let's now have a look at the second part of this response body where the limits object is. And let's now imagine that we want to assert a property down here below in the total per member object. Let's say status should be okay or something like that. We are still dealing with objects here, but you can see here that this object has sort of a random name. And of course we can write something like, let's imagine console.log. In order to go there, we are just gonna go property by property. So the first object is JSON data. JSON data has this limits property. Limits property have another property called 54BBA24 and so on. Now the problem that we'll have in this case is we are gonna get a syntax error because of how this property is named. Now, as you can see from this syntax, you will not be able to get this property using this way because it contains sort of a special characters. So we're going to use in this case the brackets notation similar to arrays to access this property. So all we'll do is replace the dot here and put a square bracket at the end as well, and put this string between quotes. Now the error now disappeared, and when I'm sending this request again, you will see here the boards. So far so good. So this is sort of a special case on how to access that. Now we have the boards property, so basically we can continue with what we had previously, and we can get total per member. And then we can get a status property. Okay, so far so good. Let's have a look here. We have okay. Now, writing this assertion, probably it's gonna be as easy as this one. I'm just gonna write it to make sure that we have a complete example. So I don't know, whatever status would be okay. And again, let's put this in a separate variable. Let's call this board status. And let's expect board status to equal okay. And now we have to test with 2 assertions. Again, make sure your assertions are failing. Everything looks good. So far we're on the right track. Now, the problem with this response body is that this property here, which we had some difficulties accessing, is a randomly generated string. And this generally means this can change. So it's probably not a good idea, because on different data sets, this property will not be called 54BBA24 or something like that. It can be called something randomly. And this test probably will only work with one scenario, but once you switch the scenario, switch the environment, switch the user, or depending on exactly what's going on with the application, this property will get another name. And this will make your test fail, because if this property doesn't exist anymore, then your script will fail. You'll not be able to read property boards of undefined because this will not exist. And you will get this weird error message and probably will have no idea what exactly is going on here. So for that reason, we are gonna try to make this a bit more robust to make sure that it's working the way we think it should work. So let's remove everything we have written so far. We are just gonna define the board status variable. But we need to find another way to find this boards. As you can do with arrays, you can do something pretty similar with objects as well. And that is iterating over properties or keys in the object. And the same we're gonna do with objects as well. So let's write for, and I'm gonna define here an object. We're going to define here a variable, let's call it key, in JSON data dot limits, because this is the object that we are actually interested in, and this object has a property and we don't know the name of the property. So let's iterate over all the properties in this object. And let's see exactly what's happening with each iteration. So let's say console.log. Let's first log the key. And then with this key, if you remember what we did previously, we can just go with limits, which is the object, and then we access a property by giving the key. So let's see how this goes. I'm going to submit a request again. I did here a small mistake, so let me quickly fix that. Limits doesn't actually exist, it's JSON data.limits. And now we have this property and we can see the boards and everything that's inside that property. Now, this is basically the same as saying, give me all the properties that this object has. In this case, there's just one property. And once you have this property, this key, it's similar to what we previously did. So this JSON data.limits key is the same as this one. Okay, but just in case there are multiple properties out there, we still cannot be 100% sure that this is the right property that we are having here. So we can just skip what we're logging here, but we want to make sure that this is the property, this is the proper properties. So the way to check that is to write an if condition. And before we write the if condition, just let's play around with console.log again. And we're going to write something similar to this thing. So we want to take advantage of a method that each object has, and that method is called hasOwnProperty. So we want to check that this object has a property called boards, because if it has a property called boards, then probably this is the exact object that we are looking for. So let's copy this from the above line. So as you've seen, this is actually our object, and we're gonna say here dot hasOwnProperty, and the property that we are looking for is boards. Let's clear the console. And you will see here that this is true. So we can build our if condition around what we have written here. So we're going to say if JSON data.limits with the key that we now have hasOwnProperty which we know now it's true, then you can say board status. Board status is then JSON data limits key. And then we have a property boards. Then total per member. Then status. And now the test is passing again and everything looks good. Now the condition that we have written here is pretty simple, and it really depends from scenario to scenario how you get to that property, how you make sure that the object you have found is the right object. But principal things follow this pattern of, if you don't know a certain property, if you just as in with an arrays, the same thing goes with object. If you don't know the property name, you can just iterate over all properties. And again, this is done by using this construct for define a variable, in this case key, in JSON data limits. And then you will see here what is the value of key, how you can access a property in an object. And then you decide on your own which conditions need to be applied in order to extract that specific data that you need. I invite you to play around with the example, and you will find this body as a resource so that you can easily get it in Postman and play around with it, make different assertions on different objects you find inside this response. And as always, if you have any questions or need any help with anything, just let me know and I'll be more than happy to help you with that.